300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Glad to have you with us on a Wednesday morning, a jam-packed Wednesday morning. A lot to talk about. Serena Williams announcing that this is the last dance for her. The U.S. Open is going to be the final tournament that she plays in. And perhaps something that you've never, ever seen before in a Major League Baseball game. That is coming up. But I have to start off with the NBA and this continuing and developing story with Kevin Durant and the Brooklyn Nets. So Kevin Durant just met with Joe Tsai over the weekend and officially provided him with an ultimatum. Now, Joe Tsai is the governing owner of the Brooklyn Nets. And he told Joe Tsai, hey, listen, either you trade me or you fire both the head coach, Steve Nash, and the general manager, Sean Marks. That was the ultimatum that he provided Joe Tsai. So Joe Tsai, of course, tweeted over yesterday, over the last couple hours, 24 hours yesterday, he reiterated his support for Steve Nash, for Sean Marks, not naming them directly, but he said, I support my staff and I back my staff's decision, as we will do whatever is in the best interest of the Brooklyn Nets. So that's the position and the public position that he's clearly taken. Now, let me first say this. I've actually always loved Kevin Durant as a basketball player. I've always respected the reverence that he's had for the game. I respect how much he is genuinely interested and genuinely passionate about the game of basketball. He's someone who clearly cares about basketball. Basketball is not just a job for him. Playing in the NBA, he doesn't give off the impression that playing in the NBA is simply a job, but his favorite hobby, that his life is all about basketball. He is a hooper day in and day out. And I have a lot of respect for guys that are fully committed and fully invested in their sport and in their craft. And I've always admired that about Kevin Durant. He's always been a no-nonsense type of guy, and all he wants to do is play basketball. And I truly, as a basketball fan, I truly hate that Kevin Durant, though he's done this onto himself, I do hate that he's in this situation and he's in this predicament. But with that being said, I detest how petulant he's been acting and how public he's been making the situation, because what Kevin Durant has always been, he's always been someone who has always been very mature. And I understand he tried to reach a resolution privately behind closed doors, and action clearly needed to be taken on his part. That's what he's felt. Obviously, that hasn't been able to happen at this point. And he's always been extremely approachable and cordial with the media. He's never shied away from reporters after big wins or big losses. He's always willing to speak. So he's always been the ultimate professional. He's always carried himself with the utmost professionalism in class and maturity, which is why I kind of despise the way that he's been acting in the situation. Because the way that I look at it is Kyrie Irving should be convicted of arson, and Kevin Durant essentially should be convicted of aiding and abetting, because those two guys wanted Steve Nash to be the head coach. And Sean Marks, say what you want about him, he's acquiesced to their every demand since their arrival. He's executed and pulled off every trade that they've wanted for DeAndre Jordan, trading away Jared Allen, acquiring James Harden, then getting rid of James Harden, hiring Steve Nash. That was all Sean Marks. He's constructed good teams for those two guys. And as much kinship as they give off, clearly these two guys are not on the same page. And what we have right now is a real-life prisoner's dilemma. And one prisoner has already made a move, and that's KD. And again, as much as they like to give off the impression that they're on the same wavelength, clearly they're not, because Kyrie Irving's agent, who I believe is his stepmom, just came out and refuted a New York Times post claiming that Kyrie Irving, quote unquote, hates Steve Nash and Sean Marks. His agent and his stepmom has come out and denied that. So why would one person, if they were really working in cahoots, why would one individual publicly proclaim their disapproval and their opposition towards a coach and a GM, while the other one simultaneously gives their rubber stamp of approval? How would that work? That doesn't make any sense. If they're really working in concert with one another, they would relay the same message. So that's one error in this whole process, is that clearly those two guys are not on the same page. And so obviously from Kevin Durant's perspective, this is strategic. This is tactic. He is forcibly removing himself from the Brooklyn Nets. And I do think that ultimately he will accomplish his goal, because the situation will become untenable. And I think that, ironically enough, as talented as the roster actually is and would be if he were to just simply return, to try to come back to a roster with Steve Nash leading the team as the head coach and Sean Marks still in the building, it just seems inhospitable, which is why I don't see it happen. Apologies for that. Which is why I just don't see it happening whatsoever. And so the situation right now, Kevin Durant will be traded. It's only a matter of time. The teams that seem most destined to acquire him are the Celtics, the Warriors, the Raptors, and the Heat. The Pelicans, I know, have been sprinkled in there a little bit. Now, of those teams, realistically, I see it coming down to the Celtics and the Warriors. The Warriors, I don't think, will give up much of their young talent, especially since they know that the market has cooled off substantially for Durant. And who knows how long the Nets are truly trying to just retain Durant and keep him on the roster. I don't see that happening much longer. So I don't think the Warriors are going to offer a very good trade or make a very good trade. So I think it ultimately is going to be the Celtics, because the Celtics can offer the Nets the best individual asset, which is Jaylen Brown. Obviously, there will be other components to the trade, but they will be offering the best piece. The best player in the trade, I think, would be Jaylen Brown. And I see that being a deal that both sides ultimately do, because I don't think the Nets can ultimately keep him. And, of course, I'll have a ripple effect, because Kyrie Irving will likely be out of there right after. So I think that'll lead to his inevitable departure. And that whole situation will just kind of crumble. Now, it doesn't mean the Nets won't be able to compete. They may still have a good roster, but those two guys, I see their future being done. Now, as it relates to Steve Nash and Sean Marks, interestingly enough, for Steve Nash, and especially for their long-term deservedness of retaining their positions, and their long-term viability with the Brooklyn Nets organization. For Steve Nash, this is someone who I think there's still question marks around. It's a very thorny situation with him because you obviously can't question his basketball resume. Do I think he's the best X's and O's coach? No, and I think that got exposed a little bit in the postseason. But again, it's early in his coaching career, and who's to say he can't improve if given more opportunities or if he was allowed to hold on to this position a little bit longer. I don't know how good he is at inspiring his players. We know that he's passionate. We know that he's extremely knowledgeable, and he can be a fiery guy. We've seen him as a player. He's an intense guy. So he clearly cares, and obviously his basketball acumen is through the roof. So it's just a matter of whether right now, if he's the best fit. And I don't think that it can hurt Joe Tsai to have an earnest contemplation and deliberation about whether or not he deserves to be there. I don't think it's unreasonable to at least look at other potential head coaches. Doesn't mean you move off Steve Nash, but I don't think it hurts to look at someone else. Now, with regard to Sean Marks, I actually think he's done a great job. And I think if one of those two guys is going to go, it would be Steve Nash. I think Sean Marks has done everything he could possibly do to, again, acquiesce to Kyrie and KD. Now, you can look at that as a mistake, but at the same time, I would argue that any GM in his position at the time that he was hired would have tried to execute the same traits. If they presented you with a situation at the time, rewind the clock 3 years ago, you hire Steve Nash and you can acquire Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. Every GM in the league is going to do that, perhaps except the Warriors, who already had an established team. But every other team is going to do that. Every other team is going to try to pull off trades to appease and capitulate to Durant and Kyrie. It's only now that we have this 2020 hindsight that we can say, well, it was an utter disaster. But the construction of the team, which is the job of the general manager, he did a great job with that. The team just had some bad breaks. So I think if one of the two is going to go, it would ultimately be Steve Nash and not Sean Marks. But it's a terrible situation to be in, and I'm curious and eager to see how it all plays out. So I want to transition to tennis. Major announcement coming in Vogue. Serena Williams announced that the 2022 U.S. Open will officially be her last professional tournament. She intends to retire after this year's American Major. Now, this is news that obviously is not only going to reverberate throughout sports, but it's still one that I think takes a lot of time to process. It's not necessarily a surprise to people. She's 40 years old, but this is someone who is a 23-time singles major champion. Her career, it speaks for itself. 7 times the Australian Open, 3 times the French she's won, 7 times Wimbledon, and 6 times the U.S. Open. She's an Olympic gold medalist. In fact, most people don't know that she is a 14-time Grand Slam doubles champion on top of all of her accolades as a singles player. And I think that it's only fitting that this announcement would come and that she would ultimately decide to hang it up after the U.S. Open, because the U.S. Open is the first Grand Slam that she ever won in 1999. But I do think that we're living in an age in which athletes are defying science. And I think that we've become so numb and unappreciative to greatness and to sustained greatness, because we're really living in a decade in which we've been spoiled by athletes. She's spoiled us, of course, for 26 years. You look at other sports, Tom Brady, 45. He's still incredible at age 45. LeBron James, 37 going on 38. Cristiano Ronaldo marveling us at 37. Nadal and Djokovic on the men's side at 36 and 35, respectively. They're still playing at an incredibly high level. And Serena Williams, quite frankly, she's just spoiled us with her greatness and with her excellence on and off the court for the last 26 years. And I think that we've kind of become desensitized to greatness and sustained greatness. We don't have the same reverence for it as we should, as we really should, because I think obviously my entire life, Serena Williams has been the focal point of women's tennis. But I think we've gone so caught up over the last several years of her chase and her quest to capture singles title number 24 to catch Margaret Court, that sometimes we've lost sight of just how great in all of her accomplishments that she's had over the course of her career, because she's actually been quite close since that time. Her last major champion came at the 2017 Australian Open while she was pregnant. She was literally in the first trimester of her pregnancy. It was later revealed to us. And she's knocked on the door. She's been in contention 5 other times. She's reached the final of a major 4 other times since 2017. She's been extremely close. But we forget this is someone who turned pro at the age of 14. The age of 14, she turned pro. And I've said this before, and I'll say this again. She's the greatest female tennis player of all time. She's one of the greatest athletes of all time. You can make an argument she's on the Mount Rushmore of the greatest athletes, male or female, in any sport of all time. That's not hyperbolic. She's deserving to be mentioned with some of those greats. And I think for several reasons, she would fit into this category and why her career was so impactful. Because a lot of times athletes have tremendous individual careers, but they don't have the same impact as others. And I think when you look at Serena Williams and the Williams family, they really broke racial barriers. They have been torchbearers for the Black community. And what she's meant for helping to pave the way for African Americans in tennis. When you think about tennis and African Americans, you think about Arthur Ashe and you think about the Williams family, and especially Serena with her dominance. Venus, no doubt, was the first to trailblaze for her family, but Serena Williams has carried that torch and has just transcended the game, has taken it extremely far. And to me, I think one of the most telling moments of her career, and I've mentioned this story before, and I've talked about this anecdote, is back in 2001 when Serena Williams was ascending. She had already captured her first Grand Slam title. She was on the verge in 2002 of winning 2. But in 2001, she played Kim Clijsters, who had already won 4 Grand Slams at the time. And she beat her at the Indian Wells final. And she won in 3 sets, and she was booed by the fans. And to make matters worse, her family, Venus and her father Richard, attended the match, and they were booed upon their arrival. And a lot of people viewed that as perhaps a racist act because of this up-and-coming Black family dominating a predominantly white privileged sport. And so she and Venus boycotted the tournament for an entire decade out of vengeance. And this is someone in Serena who's always been extremely prideful. She's been a very powerful, confident woman, always assured of herself. She's always been very vocal and outspoken for the Black community, for any marginalized or underprivileged community. She's really been a major ally in that respect. She hasn't shied away from speaking her mind. And I think that's a characteristic that not all people and athletes in her position would have been willing to do. And yet she was willing to do that. And especially you think about the irony of a woman like Serena Williams dominating a sport like tennis. Tennis has always been about etiquette. You think about the first and classy. The first tournament, first Grand Slam was Wimbledon, 1884. All about nobility, royalty, etiquette, class. Europeans showing off their ostentation, drinking libations. There's a certain kind of elegance to the sport that was really only afforded to people in privileged positions. I've talked about this before. And yet she and her family completely uprooted the precedents and firmly inserted themselves into the forefront of the sport. And you look at her now from where she started, and obviously she started off growing up in Saginaw, Michigan, then living in South Central LA in Compton. She's the perfect example of a self-made star going from rags to riches. And now she's a global icon. She herself is an entire brand. She's got a net worth of north of $250 million. And she's left an indelible mark on the game of tennis. And I think that it's going to be a bittersweet moment when she ultimately hangs it up and retires. Because on the one hand, it'll give us an opportunity to continue to extol her and praise her for her tremendous career. But the game will have lost an incredible athlete, and she'll be dearly missed. Obviously, she hasn't retired officially just yet, but we are approaching that time. And again, the impact that she's had spans countries. She's a worldwide, global icon and the greatest female tennis player of all time. So with that, I want to transition now to baseball, to a more humorous story, to say the least. So the Pittsburgh Pirates, one of the worst teams in baseball, they lost to the Arizona Diamondbacks last night, 6-4. And the Pirates' second baseman, Rodolfo Castro, was caught on camera while he was sliding to third base. His phone flew out of his back pocket as he's sliding to third. To make matters worse, not only did you lose the game, but you also got exposed with your phone in your back pocket. So this is a double whammy. Now, here's the good news. The good news is he slid safely into third. Wasn't caught. His phone didn't inhibit his ability to lay out with his sliding glove. And he got on the bag safely. So that's the good news. The bad news is you clearly see the look of disdain and exasperation on the face of the Pirates' third base coach, Mike Rabello. And you can just see how irritated and just how internally frustrated he is by the naiveness and the ignorance of this 23-year-old kid. Now, again, he slid in safely, so it didn't impede his progress. But you also see the third base umpire kind of subtly point down at the ground to say, hey, man, you dropped something. You dropped your phone. And he quickly picks it up and hands it over to Coach Rabello. But in all seriousness, the MLB is a long season. It's 162 games. As I mentioned, the Pirates have been really bad this whole year. They're fourth. They've got the fourth worst record in baseball. They're second to the bottom in the National League. They got the worst record in the NL Central. They're last place. And these guys are just a little bit bored. They're a little dulled out. They're a little dejected. They're looking forward to the offseason already. But of course, that doesn't excuse the unprofessionalism and the inappropriate nature of having your phone in your pocket while you're playing a professional game. And I think what's unfortunate about this situation, in all seriousness, what's unfortunate about the situation is he was just called from AAA to the big leagues. This is his second season with the Pirates. He played in about 30 games for the Pirates last year. This is just his 21st or 22nd game in the majors. This year, he had kind of been demoted back down to AAA, then promoted up to the big dance once again. And it's about maximizing your chances, maximizing your moments, because they're fickle and they're transient. They don't last a long time, and you have to take advantage when you're given an opportunity. And did he just forget that he had his phone in his back pocket? I don't know. Maybe he was using it during the pregame, and as the players were running to take the field, he forgot he had it in there. Was he hoping to take a selfie with some of the infielders? Was he hoping to call his family on first base? I don't know why he had it in there, but there's no question it was extremely immature and extremely unprofessional. And unfortunately, this was a huge gaffe that he will have to live with for the rest of his life. So I'm not going to belabor how embarrassing that was. I'm not going to crush him for it. I'm sure he's already been berated by his coaches, and I'm sure that he will make sure that that never happens again in his entire life. He will be triple checking every time he steps out onto the diamond to make sure that he doesn't have anything he shouldn't be having in his back pocket. But I think the important thing here is he's a professional athlete. And yes, I understand he's a kid and he's just 23 years old. And kids make mistakes. It happens. This type of stuff happens. But don't lose sight of the fact that you're a professional athlete, and there's only 840 Major League Baseball players in the world. There are only thousands of athletes out of billions in the world that actually get a chance to do this for a living. It's a privilege and a blessing to be a professional athlete. And I hope that Rodolfo Castro realizes the opportunity that he has in front of him and doesn't squander it because of hopefully an innocuous mistake and a benign mistake. Because again, it's not a given. Your duration, your shelf life in the pros, it just doesn't last a long time. And I think you just can never lose sight of that. That's so important. And again, the chutzpah to kind of have, to take a Yiddish term, the chutzpah to play with your phone in your pocket as a professional athlete. Again, the last time I think we ever saw a professional athlete have his or her phone in their pockets during competition was Ben Simmons at a 76ers practice last preseason when he had already requested a trade out of Philly. And we saw what type of look that was for him. So that was just a wild story. I've never seen it. Again, just when you think you've seen everything in professional sports, you haven't. And that was certainly one of those moments for me. All right, final topic, my Malkin's moments. I have some great Malkin's moments for you. So all of these are in baseball. And I have to start with the Giants, San Francisco Giants' closer, Camilo Doval. So in the first game of the series against the San Diego Padres on Monday night, Doval hit 103 miles an hour on his cutter to close the door on the Padres to secure a 1-0 victory. So that speed, it set an MLB record for the fastest cutter ever tracked. So not only was that the fastest pitch of his career, but it was the fastest cutter in the pitching tracking era, which has been tracking speeds of pitches since 2008. He struck out Josh Bell. Again, that set the tone. that handed the Padres a 5th straight loss. They obviously redeemed themselves last night. Manny Machado's 3-run walk-off home run. It snapped a 5-game losing streak. But the 5th game they lost in a row was because of Duvall. Again, this is a guy who's just 25 years old, his 2nd year in the majors. And he's a flamethrower. And he's a coveted pitcher in this Giants bullpen. He showed flashes of what he's got last season in the postseason against the Dodgers. And to hit 103 miles per hour, I've seen 101, I've seen 102. I haven't seen 103 very often, if at all. So talk about bringing the heat. Camilo Duvall, nice work. Nice work indeed with that. So finally, my other Malkin's moment belongs to Shohei Ohtani of the LA Angels, who hit his 118th career home run. So with that, he passes Ichiro Suzuki for the 2nd most home runs in MLB history by a Japanese-born player. The only guy to have more, 175, has been hit by Hideki Matsui. That's it. And the path and the trajectory that Ohtani's on, I wouldn't be surprised if he passes him 2 years, 3 years max. Not to mention, Angels' Shohei Ohtani joins Babe Ruth as the only active players in MLB history to have at least 10 home runs and 10 wins in the same season. Again, he's able to collect wins because he's also a starting pitcher on top of being an excellent hitter. So according to the Angels, there are only 2 players from the Negro Leagues who also did it. You had Bullet Rogan of the 1922 Kansas City Monarchs and Ed Ryle of the 1927 Detroit Stars. That's it. So he's leading the team in home runs with 25 this year. Obviously, this last accomplishment came in their 5-1 victory over the Oakland A's. But he's now recorded 25 home runs and 100 pitching strikeouts for the 2nd year in a row, which is a feat that no other player has accomplished in MLB history. I know we continue to shower this guy with adulation, but what he's doing is just unprecedented, not just for a foreign player, for a Major League Baseball player. And the ultimate travesty is the fact that the Angels just aren't very good and we're not going to get a chance to see him in the postseason. That's the ultimate shame in all of this. I've talked about this. The Angels are never going to trade him, as they shouldn't. They should not trade him. I've made that point very clear. But even amidst a down season, once again, for the Angels, it's important to recognize what this guy's been doing. The reigning AL MVP, he's been sensational, and he just continues to shatter records. That's all the time that I got for today. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Morning Joe every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube page, Morning Joe, J-O with Jonah Malkin on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at Jonah_Malkin or at Morning_Joe_, JMalk97 on Instagram, and Jonah Malkin on TikTok. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.